right now then. Okay. Well, today, May the 15th, we'll see individuals and organizations around the world celebrating International Conscientious Objectors Day. The day celebrates every individual who has and continues to resist war in many ways, including the refusal to participate in the military structure. The day was created by the Peace Pledge Union, a non-denominational pacifist organization founded in England in October 1934 to raise awareness about and honor conscientious objectors. A conscientious objector is an individual who has claimed the right to refuse to perform military service. They do so on the grounds like conscience, religion, freedom of thought, etc. The first ever record of a conscientious objector was in ancient Rome, as far back as 295 AD, when a man by the name of Maximelanus was conscripted to the Roman army, but claimed that he could not serve due to his religious convictions. He was consequently executed. The history of conscientious objectors and pacifists in the First World War is overlooked. An attempt to erase this chapter of history, the vast majority of tribunal records were deliberately destroyed in the 1920s. Despite the negative and insulting wartime propaganda aimed at conscientious objectors, it appears only 2% of appeals made to the military tribunals for exemption from fighting were made on conscientious grounds. The more common reasons included domestic, financial, and medical matters. The government had also realized that not every man could enlist, as this would cause problems home. As early as October the 14th, the large number of volunteers enlisting were causing serious labour shortages. The government identified reserved occupations such as railway workers, miners, and farmers who could be given complete exemption, although this was not always automatic. There were also other occupations such as dentists, chemists, doctors, grocers, bakers, and coal merchants who could be given exemption if their enlistment would cause severe hardship to the public. Civil servants from certain government departments were also given exemption, as they were considered to be doing war work. So in order to demonstrate that they were not shrinkers, these men were given badges and to wear, so these professions became known as badged occupations. Alexa, I wonder if you've got a picture of the poster of the exemption certificates as a sample for people to see what exemption certificates look like. Here you see one. This is what they looked like. Military Service Act 1916. Any man who has adequate grounds for applying for a local tribunal, and you can read it. Okay, thank you, Alexa. The early years of the First World War brought a large number of casualties. Despite the number of volunteers, the British government was soon in dire need of more troops. On the 2nd of March 1916, the Military Service Act came into force. This act enforced compulsory military service for every British male aged between 18 and 41, who was either unmarried or a widower without children. Later acts widened the range of men eligible and altered age qualification. Exemption could be granted from this conscription into the military forces by means of a tribunal system, as we saw in that poster. The Conscientious clause was added to the Act because of pressure from various groups who had seen the inevitability of conscription, and because of their religious beliefs or a strong conviction against taking a human life, considered that they should be exempt or take a non-combat role. And it is from this clause that the term conscientious objectors was coined. During the First World War, more than 20,000 men in Britain were registered as conscientious objectors. And in the Second World War, 61,000 men and women were registered as conscientious objectors. Conscientious objectors were often seen as cowards. And I think you've got some slides of, I sent Alexa, to show the type of propaganda. There's quite a few there, isn't there? Yeah. Are there some more? I think they're cartoon cards. I'm afraid I couldn't enlarge it. I tried to enlarge it, but I couldn't.
It can be enlarged on our own screen.
Can you? Right, thank you.
Well, and on mine anyway, and it's an old.
Well, here's one example, you know. So there's that, the man with the bayonet there, making that poor man look as if he's a bit stupid. And there are some more as well, I think. We sent about 3 or 4, Alexa. Yes, there's another one too, I think. There we are. So that's the type of propaganda they put around. I mean, those are just a few examples. Thank you, Alexa. Today, the right to voice opposition to our government's involvement in international conflicts, such as the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. This is a right we take for granted. But in World War I, to stand up for your beliefs through refusing to kill commanded a prison sentence. During the First World War in Wales, over 900 men objected to taking up arms as a matter of conscience, and many were imprisoned for their beliefs. For example, Bertrand Russell, born in Monmouthshire, and who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1950, was imprisoned at Brixton in 1918 for his outspoken views against the USA's entry into the war as an ally of Britain. After the Second World War, he became involved in the campaign for nuclear disarmament. Then there was Ethel Davies, born in Aberystwyth, a qualified barrister, conscripted into the army in 1916, but refused to take military orders. And one of the most vocal opponents of conscription for the Great War was George Maitland Lloyd Davies, who was born in Liverpool. He was imprisoned for opposing the Great War and conscription. He and his friend Richard Roberts formed a Christian society to promote peace during World War I, called the Fellowship of Reconciliation, or Cymdeithas y Cymod, as it was known. And the society is still in existence today and is part of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. Historically, Wales is often referred to as having a tradition of being advocates for world peace. From Henry Richard, born in Tregaron, Cardiganshire in 1812, a nonconformist minister who opposed war for moral and religious reasons, and became internationally known as the Apostle of Peace. To the Welsh Women's Peace Petition of 1923, where 390,000 signatures, 296, were taken, were collected door to door throughout Wales and taken to America to be presented to the American president in a call for America to join the League of Nations. Lastly, the Greenham Common Fence women. The women which began with a march from Cardiff to the American Air Base at Greenham. And we've got some slides of those of women in Greenham and the peace petitioners. That's the fence. It started in 1981. The march from Cardiff started in 1981. And there's another one of the peace petitioners before they boarded for America. It's it's around about, they've got 1920s clothes on. There we are. Those are the women, 4 delegates who went to America with that petition. I think the petition itself stretched 5 miles long, and it was presented in a wooden chest. And the chest now has come back to Wales and is being exhibited in the National Library of Wales. Thank you, Alexa. So back to tonight, that's a kind of quick background of Conscientious Objectors. Well, the title of tonight's talk, The Peacemakers, is a title of a poem written by one of Wales's leading Welsh poets of the 20th century, who was a conscientious objector. And there have been a number of prominent conscientious objectors within the art and literature in Wales. And this evening, I would like to introduce you to 3 of them. The first one we'll visit is Thomas Evan Nicholas. I think you've got a photograph of him he's got a flat cap on. There we are. Thomas Evan Nicholas, who is known by his bardic name, Nicholas y Glais. One of Wales' most prominent pacifists during the First World War was Thomas Evan Nicholas, who was born into a farming family in 1879 in North Pembrokeshire, and was one of 5 children. He was nicknamed Nicholas y Glais after he became a minister in a chapel in Cwm Tawe in 1904. He was a poet, socialist, pacifist, and revolutionary who distinguished himself as one of the best orators in the Welsh language on issues such as socialism, peace, equality, and a Parliament for Wales. He joined the Independent Labour Party in 1905, and he was a close friend and supporter of James Keir Hardie, the founder of the Labour Party. Hardie had been elected as an MP for the Welsh mining constituency of Merthyr Tydfil in 1900. Like Hardie, Nicholas was both a Christian socialist and a committed pacifist. Nicholas acted as Hardie's election agent in 1910, and at Hardie's request, Nicholas served as the first Welsh language editor of the Independent Labour Party's newspaper, the Merthyr Pioneer. In 1914, he became a minister in the Llangybi and Llandewi Brefi areas in Cardiganshire. In 1918, he organised farm workers into a union and established a branch of the Labour Party in Ceredigion. In the same year, he resigned from being a religious minister and started practicing as a dentist in Pontardawe. In 1921, he and his wife, who had also trained as a dentist, moved the family to live in Aberystwyth. And I've got a little anecdote here, because I remember my parents, I was brought up in Cardiganshire, saying that he was a bit of a notorious dentist. People, so I don't know what kind of a dentist he was, but there were quite a few funny tales about him. Anyway, they went to live in Aberystwyth and opened up a dental practice, him and his wife. Following the Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917, Nicholas became a founding member of the Communist Party of Great Britain. The main burden of his message was the international brotherhood of man, which he expected to be realized in history once the masses joined together to overthrow their oppressors, realized that they could do it. Although Nicholas employed Marxist forms of analysis after his conversion to communism, his beliefs never entirely lost the marks of their origins in Christian socialism. When the First World War broke out, Hardy and Nicholas both opposed it. And within a few days of Britain going into the war, Hardy was speaking against it in his own constituency, but was shouted down by the crowd who supported the war. Hardy died on the 26th of September 1915. And Nicholas delivered a sermon at Hardy's memorial service at Aberdare. Nicholas continued to oppose the war throughout its duration. He thought Britain should not be involved in the First World War. Socialists argued against becoming involved in a war where they would be fighting their fellow workers in other countries. The authorities took an interest in his activities and sought evidence of treason. He was tireless in his work as a member of the Communist Party. He became a popular lecturer on Russia, especially after 1935, when he visited that country. He was in the forefront of lectures, and people traveled miles to hear him. The Red Poet, as he was called. He never wavered in his support for the policies of the Soviet Union, and he was punished for his views. And he and his son were arrested in Llanbrynmawr, North Wales, in 1940 on a trumped-up charge of fascism. They were imprisoned first in Swansea prison, and then in Brixton, where Nicholas wrote 150 sonnets expressing his Christian and communist convictions. Many of his poems are written on toilet paper. After lots of protests against their imprisonment from ministers of religion, trade union leaders, and especially the miners, after 4 months in prison, they were released. And now I'd like to read this poem which was written from his prison cell. I mean, most of his poetry is quite long and very political, but this one is quite sensitive and very moving. It's called, he's looking out through his prison cell, and he sees a sparrow. To a Sparrow, Swansea Prison, 1940. Look, here's another breadcrumb for you, and a piece of apple as a sweetener. It gladdens me to hear you steady pecking. It's good to see your cloak of grey once more. You've travelled here perhaps from Pembrokeshire's reaches, from the gorse and heather on the Vrenny's heights. And maybe on grey wing you've trilled your measures above fair Ceredigion at dawn's first sight. Accept the bread, had I a drop of wine. Mid-war's turbulence, communion, though the cell lacks lacks cross and altar, the bread as holy as it needs to be, offering of a heart, not under lock and key. He died at home in Aberystwyth on 19th of April 1971. The funeral services were held at the Independent Chapel, Aberystwyth, and Narberth Crematorium. His ashes were scattered on the Preseli Hills. My next poet is Waldo Goronwy Williams, known by his bardic name, Waldo. Waldo was one of the leading Welsh language poets of the 20th century. He was also a notable Christian pacifist and a Quaker, anti-war campaigner, and a Welsh nationalist. He was born in Haverfordwest, Pembrokeshire in 1863, the third child of John Edward Williams, a headmaster at Prendergast Primary School in Haverfordwest, and his wife Angharad. Waldo was deeply influenced by the ideal of a more egalitarian cooperative society and by pacifism. He registered as a conscientious objector in World War I and appeared before a tribunal in Carmarthen, even though he didn't have to do so, for he was too old for military service. And during the Second World War, Waldo was dismissed from a headmastership because he was a conscientious objector. During the Korea War in 1950, Waldo felt great shame at what he saw as man's barbarism to man. He refused to pay income tax in protest against spending on warfare and compulsory conscription. A protest he continued until military service ended in 1963 and all the conscripted had been released. As a result, court bailiffs seized some of his possessions, and he was imprisoned twice in the 1960s for refusing to pay his income tax. And I believe there's another little anecdote that the Quakers, I think, helped him out by buying some of the furniture back and returning it to his home. His volume of poetry, Dial Pren, Leaves of the Tree, was published in 1956. It has been described as the most outstanding work of Welsh language poetry published since 1945. His poetry shows many influences, ranging from William Wordsworth and Walt Whitman to Welsh hymns, a mystical revelation about the harmonious living he saw in the farming communities in the Preseli Hills. Belonging to a humane local community and desiring that people live together in peace are constant themes in his poetry. Tangnefeddwyr, he was the writer, he was the poem of the Peacemakers. And it's a poem, a tribute to his parents, written when German planes were bombing Swansea during World War II. As a man of great principle, and above all, as a poet, Waldo continues to influence and inspire. He summed up his conviction in an article published in a Welsh periodical, Y Banner, The Banner, in 1963. This is what he says. Nothing can set us free except an affinity with other people. Compassion towards others can lead us through places that are inexplicable to the reason, unless reason is awakened by the imagination. The only action we have is to face our guilt and transform it into conscience, and transform conscience into responsibility. Then our responsibility will become a vision. Waldo Williams died in 1971 in St. Thomas's Hospital, Haverfordwest. He was buried at the Baptist Chapel burial in Llandillo with his parents and his wife, Linda. In 2019, Waldo Williams Primary School in Haverfordwest was named in his honour, and the Waldo Williams Room at Friends House, London, is named after him. I'll just read you one verse. It's a very long poem, but just to give you an idea of what he was talking about. The Peacemakers. This is Swansea being bombed during the Second World War. Rose red sky above the snow, where bombed Swansea is a light. Full of my father and mother I go. I walk home in the night. They are blessed beyond hearing. Peacemakers, children of God. And that translation was by Tony Conran, who's translated quite a few of his poems. And the last poet I want to talk about tonight is David James Jones, bardic name Gwenallt. David James Jones, or as he is known by his bardic name Gwenallt, was a Welsh poet, critic and scholar, one of the most important figures of 20th century Welsh language literature. Was born at Pontardawyr, Glamorganshire in 1869, the eldest of 3 children of Thomas Jones and his wife Mary. His parents were from Carmarthenshire. The family moved from to Alltwen, and Gwenallt was educated at local school. He was a pupil teacher in 1916-17 and was conscripted to the army before taking his higher certificate examinations. He declared himself as a conscientious objector on a political grounds, and he spent 2 years, from June 1917 to May the 19th, 1919, in Wormwood Scrubs and Dartmoor prisons. He wrote about his experience as a prisoner in his novel Plassard Brenin, The King's Mansions, which was published in 1934. In 1927, he was appointed as lecturer in Welsh at Aberystwyth University, and he retired in 1967. Gwenalt's writings display a rare spiritual authority that gives his work an increasing importance beyond his native Wales. His distinctive voice was shaped by his embrace of an impassioned Christianity in the face of wars and bleak industrialization of the 20th century, and images of tragedy confronted by hope and generosity are woven through his poetry, and his description of local places and people have a universal and timeless significance. Gwenallt was committed and serious in everything which he undertook. In his youth, he had attended chapel quite regularly, but he later embraced Marxism. He was one of the early members of Plaid Cymru. He was politically minded and keenly interested in current affairs. He died at Aberystwyth Hospital in 1968, and a memorial plaque was placed on his house at Aberystwyth in 1997. Pacifism and peace have played an important part in the writings of the poets we have mentioned this evening. And I hope that you found it useful or interesting. And I'd like to thank you all for listening. And I'd just like to end, and there's a little symbol, I think, to be put on the screen. The right to conscientious objection to fighting in wars has now been established in international law article of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Although conscientious objection is still not allowed in several countries, for example, Finland, Turkey, and Israel. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.